You are fasting for the destruction of the temple, Jacob Conat said. Yes, and for the death of the 6 million. I've been thinking of the 6 million, yes. My father used to fast. I could never understand the point of it. I fasted a few times when I was young, but when I came to Paris, I stopped because it meant nothing to me. It meant nothing to me when I lived in Berlin in the 20s and again in Paris in the 30s. I have had long discussions with the Rev about fasting. I've lost the faculty of appreciating such an act of faith. He stopped walking and stared out across the ocean. Sometimes I think all the water is blood. It is a strange feeling. He was silent. The wind blew through his white hair. I saw the flecks of paint on his face, luminous in the sun. He crouched down along the edge of the surf where the sand was, moist but untouched now by the encroaching film of the water. His hands gathered sand into small mounds. I watched his fingers begin to work on the moist sand. It pleases me that you have chosen not to abandon things that are meaningful to you. I do not have many things that are meaningful to me, except my doubts and my fears, and my art. His fingers were shaping the sand, working swiftly, molding. I saw a face come to life. I saw eyes and nose and lips. It was his own face. He was sculpting a self-portrait out of the sand along the edge of the foaming surf. The sightless eyes stared out across the water. He rose slowly to his face and gazed down at the face. I would like not to die too soon. There are many things I still want to do. I would like to live beyond 80. Monet did it. Renoir did it. Picasso will do it. Nothing will stop that Spanish genius from reaching 80. I will bet even Chagall will do it. In Paris, we sometimes thought Chagall would not reach 40. Yet, I would like to live beyond 80. He looked at me and shook his head. Asher Lev, sometimes I find your presence a little upsetting. You carry with you too much of my own past. Come, walk with me along the beach. We will look at your hopper sunlight on the houses. You will contemplate God, and I will contemplate futility. He smiled wryly. I do not enjoy myself when I am like this, but there is nothing to be done. It is in my nature to be this way from time to time. We walked along the surf, and then up across the hot sand dunes. We walked in silence, and overhead the gulls circled and called in the afternoon sky. We came through the scrub brush and looked at the sunlight on the houses. I cannot do it, I heard him say. No one could do it. He gazed wide-eyed at the blinding sunlight. Even Monet could not do it. And he had the greatest eye of all. He turned and stared back down across the dunes at the beach and the distant mound of moist sand that wore his face. My blood offering, he murmured, but it will not help. We walked back into the house. He went to bed early that night, and in the morning, he would not rise. He is in a mood, his wife said calmly. Once in a while, he has a mood. She would not let me see him. I painted alone on the porch of the house. I painted his face in the sand with the surf, tearing at it. His wife came out onto the porch and gazed at the painting. Once in a while, he remembers the sculptures he left behind in Paris when he ran from the Nazis. They melted it all down. 10 years of sculptures. She looked at me. You are very good, a good painter and a good person. Be careful, the world is not nice to good people. She sat down on a chair and opened the book. He would not come out of his room all that day. The next morning, a car pulled up to the house, and a tall brown-haired man stepped out and came towards the porch. Tanya Khan greeted him and introduced us. He looked at the painting I was working on and then looked at me. I knew his name. I had seen his paintings in museums. He went into the house. 4 more painters came over that day. one of them from as far away as Woods Hole. The others were all in Provincetown for the summer. I knew their names. Shortly before the next day, a cab stopped at the house and Anna Schaefer hurried inside. She greeted me briefly and went off with Tanya Khan. They were gone. A lot of time. The cab waited near the house. I stood on the porch watching the gulls. Had there been birds on the trees along my street? Had I ever seen them, wheeling and circling? I could not remember. Behind me, a door opened and closed softly. I turned. "Are you having a good summer?" Anna Schaefer asked. "Yes." "I am glad." "Will he be all right?" "Yes, it passes, but it is unpleasant while he has it. He is like a light that is dying. It takes a few days." "You are doing good work this summer?" "I think so." Jacob Kahn reports to me that he is satisfied. Now I must take the cab back to Hyannis and see if there is a flight to New York. Goodbye, Asher Lev. Be especially kind to your teacher. He is filled with memories of unpleasant things these days. She went off in the cab. Tanya Khan came into the porch. He is better. Anna has a way of helping him. She sat down on a chair and opened her book. He has always come out of it. Of course, there is the chance he may not. One learns to live with fear. He came out onto the porch that evening and watched the sky grow dark. Then he went inside. Later, as I passed his studio on the way to my room, I saw he had turned on a set of floodlights and was painting, stripped to the waist, a huge canvas toned in a wash of burnt sienna. He was painting in a frenzy, filling the surface with crimson and black forms. I watched him for a while, then went to my room. In the morning, we painted together. We did not talk about the past 3 days. When we went down to the beach before noon to swim, I saw him staring at the sand before the curving line of surf. The sand was damp and smooth. He went into the water and swam a long time, far away from the shore. Then he came out of the water and stood next to me, dripping. His white hair wild and wet, droplets of water clinging to his mustache. "I will make it past 80, he said, if I can keep from thinking too much about the past. That was a good swim for an impossible old man of 73. We walked back alongside the dunes to the house. The following week, I received a letter from my mother. She was well. My father was working very hard. She urged me to take care of myself and not to forget that I was a Jew. She sent her good wishes to Jacob Kahn. The letter was postmarked Zurich. The previous letter I had received from her had been postmarked Vienna, Paris, and Bucharest. Often that summer, I lay in my bed trying to sleep and found myself thinking of my parents. I would see them gazing out train windows at misty hills and dark mountains and tiny villages set in green valleys. I would see them on the boulevard villages set in boulevards of great cities, walking together. My father, tall and bearded, dressed in his neat dark clothes. My mother, short, slight, her eyes warm and alive to the sounds around her. The two of them together, my father's head inclined towards her, listening to her words. I wondered what they talked about during all those days of travel. Russian Jews, the yeshivos my father was bringing to life, their strange son, my father's certainty of the trouble I would one day bring upon them. I would lie awake at night, seeing them together, and finally I would sleep. And sometimes there would be dreams. One day, in the 3rd week of August, Jacob Kahn took me to Hyannis, and we spent part of the day visiting galleries. 2 days later, we drove to Boston to see a Cubist exhibit. All the way back in the car, Jacob Kahn talked about the exhibit and about the Cubists he had known in Paris before the First World War. We changed the eyes of the world, Asher Lev. Picasso and Brock with painting, and Jacob Kahn with sculpture. Picasso was frightening. We met and talked, all of us, and thought of this idea or that idea. Picasso would go back into his studio, and in a few hours, he had it all worked out on a canvas. He is a genius. He can use up a lifetime of ideas of an ordinary good painter in a few weeks. People used to hide their canvases from him. There is something demonic about such a gift, Asher Lev. Demonic or divine. I do not know which. Giotto, Michelangelo, Picasso. It will be the 300 years before the world assimilates what has happened to art as a result of Picasso and the Cubists. He smiled delightedly. Ah, the stories I could tell. You're an old gossip, his wife said, looking up. She had been sitting beside him on the front seat, reading. Yes, he said, I love gossip. It is one of my more delicious weaknesses. A few days later, he drove me to Provincetown, docks, and let me out. I wandered along the waterfront, sketching the boats and the gulls, and the boys diving and swimming. I watched them diving and swimming, and I sketched their young bodies in the sunlight. Then I stopped sketching for a while and stood at the end of the long wooden pier and watched them in the water, swimming smoothly with the liquid ease of a fish. I envied them, their freedom. I went from the pier and walked slowly along the streets of the town, narrow, crowded streets filled with cafes and restaurants and souvenir shops. I came into a small aquarium and watched sharks swim about behind their thick glass. I sketched the twisting of their bodies and the hideousness of their mouths. People gathered around me, and there were murmurs of awe. Here is my gift, I thought, publicly displayed. I drew without hesitation. I thought I heard someone applaud. I could not be certain. I saw a young boy about 8, leaning forward, watching. I signed one of the drawings, dated it, tore it from the sketchbook, and gave it to him. His eyes went wide. There was a soft ripple of laughter and approval. I came out into the sunlight and walked down the streets. Sometime during the walking, I saw myself in the window of a restaurant and stared indifferently at my face and realized my side curls were behind my ears. I turned away and continued along the street. I went up a side street and sketched the faces of old women on the porches and small wooden houses. I sketched the faces of old men, wrinkled, leathery faces. The faces of fishermen who knew intimately the kind of universe far from the street where I had grown up. Here on a street of Provincetown, fishing families, I sketched people I had never known before, but with whom I felt a strange kinship. We all lived together on the same quick silvery water and sand. I sketched their faces and gave some of the sketches away and was rewarded with grateful smiles. Later that day, Jacob Kahn picked me up in front of the gallery where we had met the man he had called a whore. He looked at my face. You had a good day? He asked quietly. I showed him the sketches. He glanced through them and nodded. You had a good day, he said. I'm going to be an artist, I said. I'm going to be a great artist. You have been an artist for a long time, Asher Lev. We drove together through the town. Early one morning at the end of August, a truck came up to the house. We loaded the paintings of the summer into the back and closed them and locked the doors. We stood on the porch and watched the truck drive off. He is a careful driver, Jacob Kahn said. I have used him before. I did not say anything. Later we swam together, and then I sat at the edge of the line of surf and made a sculpture of my face out of the wet sand. Jacob Kahn watched me. It is very good, he said when I was done. We swam together, and when we came out of the water, the face had crumbled into a pile of soggy sand, devolved by the surf. We stared at it, and I looked at Jacob Kahn. No, he said. I will not be ill again. I will never make it to 80 if I indulge myself too much with that illness. But I saw that face of sand in my sleep that night. And I woke up and I went to the window and stared out at the dunes and thought I heard soft mocking laughter float towards me from the dark water beyond. 2 days later, we drove back to New York, and by summer of water and sand had come to an end. 11. I was attending the Ladover Yeshiva High School. I asked to see the registrar. He was a short, thin man with a dark beard and a bald head. He wore rimless spectacles and a small, dark skull cap. He looked up at me from behind the desk. Yes, I did not ask to take French, and someone put French on my class card. Yes, I do not want to take French. What do I need with French? He adjusted the spectacles delicately on the bridge of his nose. Asher Lev, you will take French. You will take 4 years of French, and you will earn for yourself excellent marks in French. The Reb specifically requested that we make certain you study French. I stared at him. Is there anything else? No. Then good day, Asher Lev. On Rosh Hashanah, I sat in the synagogue and prayed. The prayer shawls and white garments flooded the synagogue with light. There was white light everywhere, on the chairs and benches, near the podium, where the reader chanted the prayers. Near the ark where the Reb sat praying, quietly alone, faintly luminous against the dark wood of the wall. We stood, and the Reb sounded the shofar. The sound filled the large synagogue, the air vibrating invisibly as the piercing notes caught up with one another and echoed from the distant corners. I looked at the bundles of prayers on the podium in front of the Reb. Somewhere in those bundles, there were prayers for my mother and father and for Jacob Kahn. I hoped the Ribbon Shalom would listen more seriously to my prayers for my parents and Jacob Kahn than he had to my father's prayer for me. On Yom Kippur, I wept when I remembered my father's weeping over the martyrdom of the 10 sages. On Sukkos, I marched in the synagogue procession with the lalov and esrog my uncle had purchased for me. On Simchas Torah, I danced with a Torah scroll, and there on the edge of the crowd of thousands that always came to watch our joy on that day was Jacob Kahn. I pulled him into the line, and we held the Torah together and danced. His small dark skull cap was an awkward on his head, and was the grasp of his fingers upon the Torah. But we held it together and we danced. I continued going to him on Saturday afternoons. I continued painting and drawing, and now I did some sculpting too. I studied Gemara, I studied Hasidus, I studied French. The opening of Jacob Kahn's show took place on a Sunday afternoon in late October. It was a lavish black tie affair with drinks and food. The gallery was crowded. The sculptures had been carefully positioned along the floor and walls, in form and line and texture, in the way they utilize the space within and around them. There were clear and awesome indicators of a powerful and visionary aesthetic. He had transformed forever the nature of sculpting as Picasso had transformed forever the nature of painting. One of the sculptures consisted of 2 heads facing in the same direction. One head was Jacob Kahn's, the other was mine. They were identical to the heads we had sculpted out of wet sand among the edge of the clutching surf. Now they were in bronze. The small red label on the base of the sculpture indicated it had hardly been purchased. I moved through the gallery, listening. It seemed an intelligent crowd. I heard much talk about Picasso and Cubism, and in his studio, were there. At one point during the afternoon, I found myself next to Anna Schaefer. She wore a gown, and her face was flushed with excitement. "It is a grand success," she cried exuberantly. "You have no idea what I went through to get him to agree to a show. You will not give me such trouble, Asher Lev, will you? I should not take such heartache from both of you. Look around. It is a magnificent day." She turned to greet someone, and I moved away. I saw Jacob Kahn near a wall, dressed in a dark suit and dark bow tie, surrounded by a dense crowd, and looked stiff and uncomfortable. His wife stood beside me, smiling and talking calmly to a woman in diamond, but looking as if she would rather be reading one of the Russian or French books. Somehow I managed to make my way up to them. "Asher," Jacob Kahn, Tanya said, "you are looking fine." "Congratulations," I said. "It is a great show." "Yes," Jacob Kahn said. "You don't think so? I wish I had Picasso's gull and could stay away from these things. They destroy me. A few more of these, and I will never make it to 80. "You will make it to 90, Tanya said calmly. "I wish I had the Spaniard's gall. Instead, I have a Jewish heart. I would not want to hurt Anna." "I like the two heads," I said. He looked at me. "Very much." "I like them too," he said. "Who bought them?" He shrugged and would not respond. I moved through the crowd and stood next to Anna Schaefer. "I saw you with Jacob," she said. "Is he suffering terribly?" "He says he is." "Poor man!" "He does this to please me. He wishes he had Picasso's contempt for such things." "Yes, how I know the old man." "Who bought the two heads?" "Which?" I told her. "Ah," she said. "Who bought them?" She told me. I stared at her. She smiled faintly. "They are among his collectors. They have a number of his pieces. It is a beautiful sculpture. He made it when he returned after the summer." She looked at me. "He has developed an affection for you, Asher Lev." I did not say anything. When I left the gallery later that afternoon, it was still crowded. On the subway ride home, I thought about the sculpture of the two heads and wondered where they would put it. In a library? In a garden? In a living room? What would the eyes stare at? Ornate drapery? Marble? Books in leather bindings? Rare flowers? It was a queer feeling to know that a likeness of my head would be soon in the home of one of the wealthiest families in America. The reviews of the show were uniformly appreciative and filled with praise. I read in one of the newspapers that the entire show had sold out at the opening. The next time I saw Jacob Kahn, I congratulated him on that. He looked bereaved. The weeks went by. I continued traveling to Jacob Kahn. The room in which I lived became crowded with drawings and canvases. My uncle came into the room one night early in December and stood in the doorway watching me work on a painting of my memory of Mrs. Rickover. She had gone to live with a married daughter in Detroit after my mother left from Europe and had died of a heart attack on a downtown Detroit street in late November while shopping for a gift for a new grandson. He stood in the doorway a long time watching me paint. Then he cleared his throat softly. "Am I disturbing you?" "No." "It is a good painting. Thank you." "Asher." Goldie and I were talking. "Look at your room. It is crowded and small." "It's a good room. We will fix up the attic for you." I stopped painting and I looked at him. "It is a whole floor. No one uses it. We will fix it up and you will have more room." Carpenters came, painters came. A month later, the whole family, my uncle, my aunts, their 4 children, helped me move upstairs. When it was done, my uncle surveyed the attic, chewed thoughtfully on a cigar and said, "Now you are a painter. When someone writes the history of Asher Lev, he will say his uncle fixed up with his first real studio. This is a studio. Now, the closets you had until now. It'll take you 5 years to fill up this studio. I did a painting of him and his family and gave it to them for Hanukkah. He framed it and put it on the wall of the living room. He called it Authentic Lev and kept talking about the fortune it will be worth one day. The attic room was large, with a high sloping roof and a tall window that looked out onto an old maple. I could barely see the street through the thick tangles of branches. I worked and slept in the room. I did not think it would take me 5 years to fill it. Between semesters, Jacob Kahn took me by train to a Van Gogh exhibit at the Philadelphia Art Museum. We talked about the Post-Impressionists and the Nobbies and the Favs. We talked about Gauguin and Matisse and Vlaminck. We came back in a snowstorm that delayed the train and got us into New York more than 2 hours late. I called my uncle from the station. He answered the phone and I heard his voice tremble. He was relieved to hear from me and grateful that I had thought to call. Early in February, Jacob Kahn sent a plaster piece out for casting it bronze. When it came back, I saw it was a sculpture of the two of us dancing with a Torah. I had not seen him sculpt it. He put it in the corner of the studio. One day, I looked for it, and it was no longer there. Tanya likes it, he said. I took it home. I asked him once if they had had any children. They had had a daughter, he said. She had died of influenza in Paris at the age of 4. He came to the Dover Florbregen in the second week of February. We were commemorating the day of the Reb's father removing himself from his world. The synagogue was filled with thousands of people. The men sat at the table. The students stood at the benches around the walls. There were benches along the area in front of the ark. Elders and guests of honor sat on those benches. I saw 2 Jewish novelists on one of those benches, and I saw Jacob Kahn, thick shoulders, the dark beret covering his white hair. The Reb sat on a cushioned chair at a table in front of the microphone. He wore a dark kaftan and an ordinary dark hat. He stood for a few moments in Yiddish. He spoke for a few minutes in Yiddish about the need for a true Torah education for Jewish children. He quoted from the Gemara and the Midrash and the Zorah. The huge crowd was hushed, listening. His words came clearly through the microphone. Those same words were being transmitted by telephonic hookup to every Ladover community in the world, to England, France, Germany, Italy, Switzerland, Holland, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Austria, Israel, South America, North America, Australia, Canada, Mexico, and perhaps elsewhere as well. I wondered if my parents were now listening to the Reb. It was a suddenly warm feeling to think about. The 3 of us might be listening to the Reb together. When the Reb was done talking, someone began a song. There was rhythmic singing. Little paper cups of vodka were held up to be blessed by a nod of the Reb's head before being drunk. Then the singing stopped and the Reb spoke again about the importance of sanctity of the Jewish family. There was more singing. I looked up at the benches behind the Reb and saw that Jacob Kahn was no longer there. A moment later, I felt a tug on my sleeve. "Come outside with me, Asher," Jacob Kahn said. I followed behind him as he moved slowly through the dense crowd. Outside on the street, the air was cold and sharp, with the feeling of coming snow. We stood on the sidewalk away from the crowd, near the doors. There were 2 police cars at the curb and 4 patrolmen on the sidewalk in front of the building. 15 years ago, there was nothing here, Jacob Kahn said, gazing at the synagogue and at the headquarters building along with it. The house was here. I think a doctor or a dentist owned it. But none of this was here. He gestured towards the crowd. He is a good man, our Reb. He looked at me. I will be going to Europe for a month. I was called 2 days ago and thought I would tell you tonight rather than on the telephone. I leave tomorrow night. I shivered in the wind. In Zurich, they are planning a retrospective for a good friend. They are asking for advice. That will take a week. Then I will go to Italy. There is some marble I want to look at. I was quiet. Asher Lev, it will only be for a month. Your world has not come to an end because Jacob Khan is going on a trip. You may use the studio anytime you wish. There is a new piece of wood I had brought in today, and you might want to use it. I did not say anything. It is not in my nature to make long farewells. Goodbye, Asher Lev. He shook my hand and walked away quickly beneath the winter streets. I did not go back inside. I walked home and went to bed. I took the subway to his studio the following Sunday afternoon, but I found the silent enormity of the room intolerable. After an hour, I closed it up and I went home. I did not return to his studio. Instead, I worked in my attic room. I painted him swimming in the ocean. I painted him sculpting in the sand. I painted him walking with his wife. I painted the two of us painted together at the edge of the dunes. I painted him painting a huge canvas stripped to the waist. The room began to look cluttered with drawings and canvases. No, I would not need 5 years to fill this room. He returned in March, 1 month after he had gone. He called me. It had been a fine trip. Italy especially had been admirable. Italy was always admirable, especially Florence. I met your parents in Zurich. They are well and send you their love. You know they will be back for Pesach. Will I see you Sunday? Yes. You will have to see Florence one day, Asher Lev. There are people I will send you to. It is a gift, that city. I went to him the following Sunday. He looked well and was exuberant. I am always exuberant after Italy. It is the marble. We worked together, and soon it was as if he had not been away at all. My parents arrived by ship on the next day of March. They moved into my uncle's house and lived in the room I had once occupied before transferring to the attic. My father looked rested. He had put on weight and was almost completely lost his limp. Looking at him during those weeks, I often wondered if I, too, would be gray in my early 40s. But he seemed once again strong, and it was clear that he had really needed my mother. We said very little to one another. He was uneasy in my presence. There was between us now a permanent high wall of uncertainty and hostility. My uncle made an effort to pierce that wall the first night my parents were back. He brought my father upstairs to the attic. I was at my desk, reading. They stood in the doorway looking down at the center of the drawings and canvases. I will have to buy him a house, my uncle said, speaking in Yiddish and chewing on a cigar. Look how he is filling the attic. My father's face was dark. I could see the anger in his eyes. You are encouraging him. He spoke as if I were not in the room. I am doing what I think is right. You give him money for his paint. I did not ask you to give him money. Arya, do you want your son to steal? My father looked at him. I could see his lips tighten beneath his gray beard. Listen to me, Arya. Listen to your brother. Reconcile yourself to your son. My father said nothing. He is a good boy. He cannot help what he does. Only an animal cannot help what he does. Arya! My father turned and went from the room. There was a heavy silence. My uncle sighed and shook his head. He is a stubborn man, your father. It is both a weakness and a strength to be so stubborn. Sometimes during the intermediate days of Passover, I walked with my mother along the parkway near our apartment house. She looked young and lovely, but her eyes were sad. Jacob Kahn told us in Zurich that you had a fine summer. Yes. He succeeded in angering your father. I was quiet. We walked beneath the trees. It is impossible to talk to your father about you. Hopelessly impossible. She looked at me, and her eyes were moist. It hurts me to be caught between my husband and my son. I did not know what to say. We walked on and came to the apartment house and stood on the street. Looking up at the window of the living room, the Venetia blind had been raised. We could see the houses and the street reflected in the glass of the window. We think we may give up the apartment, my mother said. We don't know how long we'll be in Europe. It doesn't seem to make much sense to keep it. We turned and started back to my uncle's house. Asher, come with us to Europe. No. We miss you. I miss you. There are great art schools in Vienna. No. Asher. He'll try to take it away from me. No. She stared. No, I said, no. All right, Asher. I'm worse than an animal. Asher, please. He won't take it away from me. All right, hush, all right. She shook my hand. I felt her slender fingers cool and strong against my skin. We walked back together beneath the young spring trees. My uncle urged them not to give up the apartment. Had the Reb told my father his position in Europe was permanent? No, the Reb had not said that. Then they should keep the apartment. Did they know how difficult it was to acquire rent-controlled apartments these days? They left for Europe by ship in the 3rd week of April, and I went back to Jacob Kahn. Yes, Jacob Kahn said, when I told him of my parents' visit. I am afraid I have made an enemy of your father. Why does he hate me? I don't understand. He thinks you are wasting your life. He thinks you have betrayed him. He is not pleasant for a man. It is not pleasant for a man like your father to see his son painting nudes and the other thing you paint. It is for him, at best, a frivolity, and at worst, a desecration. You and your father are two different natures. There is nothing to be done about it, Asher Lev. The Reb isn't angry. Why isn't the Reb angry? The Reb is a very wise man, and he is of a different nature than your father. I don't understand. Do not try to understand. Become a great artist. That is the only way to justify what you are doing to everyone's life. I painted and studied and brought it about my parents. Jacob Kahn's words haunted me. That is the only way to justify what you are doing to everyone's life. I did not understand what he meant. I did not feel I had to justify anything. I had not willfully hurt anyone. What did I have to justify? I did not want to paint in order to justify anything. I wanted to paint because I wanted to paint. I wanted to paint the same way my father wanted to travel and would work for the Reb. My father worked for Torah. I worked for what? How could I explain it? For beauty? No. Many of the pictures I painted were not beautiful. For what, then? For truth? I did not know how to put it into words. For a truth I could only bring to life by means of color and line and texture and form. And so I painted and I studied, and I began once again to see my thunderous, mythic ancestor. I saw other things as well. The prophylactic on the Provincetown beach, the nudes I had drawn and painted, the girls waiting along Manhattan side streets, certain books in stores, certain magazines on newsstands. I painted in a frenzy of fierce and restless energy, and slowly the room filled with my work. One day in June, I put a wet and finished canvas near my attic window. I looked outside and could not see the streets for the thick new leaves of the trees. I spent the summer in Provincetown with Jacob and Tanya Khan. It was a calm and beautiful summer. I met some of his artist friends. Then I spent long nights talking. They spent nights talking. I sat and I listened. I sat and I listened the following summer too. And sometimes towards the end of the summer, I began to join in the talk. There were things I wanted to say. I said them, and they sat and listened, and we talked. Those were lovely summers. Only once in both summers did Jacob Khan indulge his illness, and then only briefly. My parents returned to America for the holiday after that last Provincetown summer. My mother began urging me to spend the following summer in Vienna. But I was afraid summer in Vienna would extend itself into 1 or 2 years in Europe. I had come to enjoy living with my aunt and uncle and their noisy brood of children. I did not want to live with my father, so I refused. That was a bleak holiday for me. My aunt and uncle joined my mother in her insistence that I would go to Vienna. My father remained aloof, not seeming to care about whether I went or not. Jacob Khan was campaigning around the country for John Kennedy. Hitler had taught him to take an interest in politics, he had said to me after Kennedy's nomination. He was going to organize nationwide artists for Kennedy Group. People will listen to a 75-year-old man, he said. They will think I possess some wisdom. I did not see him at all during the campaign. I relented to their pleas. I would go to Vienna. You were right to do that, Jacob Khan said when I saw him again after the election. Why? They are your parents. You should be with your parents. Why? He looked at me sharply. You do not want to go? No. Why did you agree? They all piled on me. You have been piled on before, Asher Lev. I wish you had been around. Learn to stand on your own feet, Asher Lev. Even if I live to 80, I will not be here forever. I do not want to live with my father. Then change your mind. No. Then do something. But do not broaden my studio. Broaden your attic. Here we think and we work. We do not indulge ourselves in brooding. I'll broaden my algebra class. It's as good a place as any for brooding. Maybe I'll broaden my physics class. You are developing an interesting sense of humor, Asher Lev. He said to me one day in December, I think John Kennedy will be a great president. I like the people he is surrounding himself with. But I was not interested in politics and cared little about Kennedy and his people. I shrugged and continued painting. He stood behind me one afternoon and watched me paint. He was silent a long time. Then he said, Asher Lev, what are you doing? I explained it to him. He looked at me. Then he looked at the canvas. Yes, he said very quietly, I understand. He went off to his own work, but from time to time, throughout the rest of the afternoon, I saw him glancing at me in a strange and curious way. The winter weeks passed with laden heaviness. I did not want them to pass at all. I dreaded the oncoming summer. There was still coldness in the air the first day of Passover. I spent all the intermediate days in galleries and museums. On one of those days, Jacob Khan accompanied me to a museum of modern art, and I discovered something about 2 of the Picassos that I had not noticed on previous trips. I pointed it out to Jacob Khan, and he stared at the paintings and nodded slowly and gave me a strange and curious look again. Early one May afternoon, I took a subway to a Jewish museum in Manhattan. I saw Torah crowns, Torah painters, Torah covers, spice boxes, illuminated manuscripts. Some were fine pieces of work, but there was no art. It was all crafts and unmoving. I felt vaguely betrayed. On the last Tuesday in June, my uncle drove me Idlewild Airport and put me on the plane to Vienna. I became ill on the plane. I was ill during the stopover in London. I was ill on the flight from London to Vienna. In Vienna, I lay in a strange bed in the strange room and saw my mother's face throughout dark fog. Somewhere along the edge of the fog, I sensed my father's rage. I heard strange voices and languages I could not recognize. I heard Yiddish and French and what sounded like Russian. Food poisoning, someone said. Virus, someone said. Nervous shock, someone said. I heard my father shouting. I sat in front of an open window that looked across a dark river to old gabled buildings. It was raining. Rain came in the open window and collected in puddles on the wooden floor. I saw Yudel Krinsky. What was Yudel Krinsky doing in Vienna? Hello, Reb Yudel Krinsky. Vienna is a city of waltzes and cafes, Yudel Krinsky whispered. Vienna is a city that hates Jews. It rained on the river and the gabled houses. I saw sand in a vast ocean in the rain. I saw dunes and white sunlight on shingled houses. Someone had me by the arm. I heard my mother and father. There was a quarrel. It swirled poisonously around me. I felt its rage and hate. A man with a beard led me gently into a silver bird and sat with me through the clouds. My uncle met me at the airport and took me home. It was the end of the 3rd week of July. I lay in bed for 3 days, then began wandering around the house again. I did a painting of a dark river in the rain. In the 2nd week of August, my uncle put me on a bus to Provincetown. Jacob Kahn met me at the station. He looked bronzed, and his hair and walrus mustache were sharply white in the brilliant sunlight. Well, Asher Lev, he said gently, the climate of Vienna did not agree with you. Welcome. I went home with him. We painted and swam and walked in the surf. We talked at the hopper sunlight on the houses along the dunes. Tanya Khan showed me a small sculpture he had made in July and had bronzed by Castor outside of the Wellfleet. It was a sculpture of me wearing shorts, a sports shirt, sandals, and my fisherman's cap. He had placed my side curls behind my ears. He missed you, Tanya Khan said. The registrar called me into his office. Asher Lev, are you planning to go to college? Yes. To which college? Brooklyn. He adjusted the rimless spectacles on the bridge of his thin nose and peered at me. Your parents know of your plans? Yes. They approve? My mother approves. My mother wants me to go to college. He did not ask about my father. Instead, he said, what will you study in college? I do not know. Whatever you study, one of your courses will be Russian. I looked at him. The Russian language. No, I said. The Reb has expressly asked, no. Do not be disrespectful, Asher Lev. No, I said no. He peered at me narrowly through the rimless spectacles. Very well. Good day, Asher Lev. Outside of the street, the trees wore dead leaves. I shivered in the November wind. Rav Mendel Dorachov asked to see me. I climbed the stairway of the headquarters, buildings late on evenings, and walked along the corridor to the waiting room. The room was empty, save for Rav Dorachov, who sat behind the desk, gaunt, dark-bearded. Sit down, Asher Lev, he said. I took the chair he offered me. Your parents are well. My mother is well. He looked at me from behind the desk. After a moment, he said, Asher Lev, are you going to college? Yes. You will continue to attend the yeshiva while you are in college? Yes. Asher Lev, we feel it will be of help if you study the Russian language in college. I am not interested in the Russian language. I do not care about the Russian language. Asher Lev, remember to whom you are speaking. Leave me alone, I said. Asher, leave me alone. One is enough. Leave me alone, please. I am speaking for the Reb Asher Lev. Please, I said. Please, please, please. He was silent for a long time. Then he dismissed me with an abrupt gesture of his hand. There was snow on the streets. A bitter wind blew along the parkway. I was told that the Reb wanted to see me. I climbed the stairway on trembling legs and came into the waiting room. Rav Mendel Dorochov took me into the Reb's office and left, closing the heavy wooden door. The Reb sat behind his desk. He looked at me from across the room. He seemed garbed in light. Asher Lev, I heard him say softly. Come here, come here. I went up to him. I felt his eyes on my face. You look tired, my Asher. Sit here beside me. Here. I sat in the chair alongside his desk. He gazed at me somberly. How are you feeling, Asher Lev? I am well, Reb. How you have grown, and your beard. But you are thin. You are too thin. Jacob Kahn tells me you work very hard. I was quiet. He has been a good teacher. Yes. He is a good person. He is not an observer of commandments, but he is a good person. I did not say anything. I hear from your parents that they are well. Yes. The letters from your mother, they are often sad. I was quiet. Asher, Asher, the Reb said softly, this world has not been kind to you. I sat very still. He shook his head slowly. Everything is in the hands of heaven, except the fear of heaven, he quoted. What can I tell you, my Asher? I do not know what the Master of the universe has waiting for us. Certain things are given, and it is for man to use them to bring goodness into the world. The Master of the universe gives us glimpses, only glimpses. It is for us to open our eyes wide. I was quiet. Asher Lev, my Asher Lev. Jacob Kahn tells me you have greatness. He tells me you will soon be ready to show yourself to the world. His words are for me a glimpse, a light. I say to myself, Asher Lev will be a great, great artist. He will travel about the world in search of ideas and people. Great artists make the entire world their home. You have already begun to travel, and I say to myself, there are great museums in Europe. There are great museums in Russia. You know of the Hermitage in Leningrad and the museum in Moscow. Russia is a land rich in art, and you will one day wish to travel there. That is for me a glimpse, my Asher. I am trying to open my eyes wide and to see. I will tell you what my father, may he rest in peace, once told me. Seeds must be sown somewhere, everywhere. Only some will bear fruit, but there would not be the fruit from the few had the many not been sown. Do you understand, my Asher? I nodded slowly. Yes, he said, I am certain you understand. I wish you a long and healthy life, my son. I give you my blessings for greatness in the world of art and greatness in the world of your people. I walked back to my uncle's house in the ice and snow of the January streets. That spring, I flew to Chicago with Jacob Kahn to see Brancusi exhibit at the Art Institute. That summer, I drove to Provincetown with Jacob and Tanya Kahn and lived in my world of water and sand. That fall, I entered college and registered for a class in Russian. I painted. I attended college and I studied Russian. I attended the yeshiva and studied Gemara and Hasidus. I traveled to Manhattan galleries and saw the beginnings of a mocking art which I disliked. Jacob Kahn called it nihilism. He despised it. He regarded it as an undisciplined destruction of aesthetic values. Duchamp was to blame for this, he said bitterly. I began to understand what it meant to have once been a revolutionary in art, and then to become in turn the target of a new revolution. Sometimes I think it is not wise to grow too old, Jacob Kahn said to me one windy afternoon as we walked together along the Madison Avenue. But I am not aware that we are given a choice in this matter. He brought me into Anna Schaefer's gallery. She was behind her desk, and she smiled delightedly when she saw us. "My young prodigy and my impossible old man," she said, taking my hand. Jacob Kahn kissed her cheek. There were paintings on the walls. The forms and muted colors intrigued me. "He is a splendid painter," Anna Schaefer said to me. "Vienna's. He loves to paint chairs. He is another of my impossible old men. Go and look at them." I wandered through the gallery. Anna Schaefer and Jacob Kahn were talking quietly. I came back to them. "He is very good," I said. "Yes," Anna Schaefer said, "and he sells well." "I knew him in Paris," Jacob Kahn said. "He sold well in Paris, too." "That is where your pictures will hang in the spring," Anna Schaefer said to me, pointing to the walls. I stared at her and felt a shock move through me. "I would have done it this year," she said, "but the old man would not let me." "He is still a boy this year," Jacob Kahn said. "A boy should not rush to make his soul naked." "I think you will be the youngest artist ever to have a one-man show in a Madison Avenue gallery," Anna Schaefer said. "I may bill you as Asher Lev, Brooklyn prodigy." She laughed softly. "Look at his face, Jacob." "I am looking. I would like to sculpt that expression, but I do not happen to be carrying a block of marble on me." Outside, we walked together on the windy streets. "You are happy, yes?" Jacob Kahn said. I nodded and did not know what to say. "Be happy," he said. "Be happy. These are the good times. Be happy, Asher Lev. Later you will understand how truly good these times have been." My uncle and aunt were delighted when I told them. Yudo Krinsky was delighted. "The colors you paint with you bought here, yes? I am happy for you, Asher Lev." I wrote my mother. She wrote me back saying she was very happy. Yes, she had informed my father. They were probably returning from Europe during the summer, she wrote. My father's work was coming to an end. When I informed my aunt and uncle, and would I ask them to inform the tenants in the apartment. I lived that year in a fever of expectation. The winter seemed unusually mild. Jacob Kahn came to the house one day and from the stacks of canvases piled against the walls, selected the ones for the show. "It will take your uncle 5 years to scrape the paint from your room," he said. "You have learned all my bad habits." He looked at me. "Yes, we will show the 2 nudes, Asher Lev. They are important to your development. We're not playing games. You will enter in truth or you will not enter at all." A truck came one afternoon while I was in school and took away the paintings he had chosen. The weeks went by. One April afternoon, I came into Anna Schaefer's gallery and I watched as they put up my paintings. I did not like how some of the canvases had been hung. "Artists should paint and not hang," Anna Schaefer said. "Your colleagues have destroyed the frame and soon they will destroy the walls. Go away, Asher Lev. Go home and paint. I was hanging canvases before you were born." I walked the wind-blown streets of Manhattan. She had said, "Your colleagues." I walked the streets and I tasted the gold sun that lay across the city. To this day, I do not know all the details that went into the preparation of that show. Anna Schaefer sent out the announcements, contacted some of the collectors privately, and prepared the catalog. A week before the opening, I learned that it had all amounted to a great deal of money. "Who is paying for it?" I asked Jacob Kahn. "You are." I stared at him. "She will take it from your sales. She has a great affection for you, but she is a businesswoman." "Does she also get a percentage of each sale?" 30%. "Do not look at me like that. What do you think she means when she talks about becoming rich off your work?" "She has become rich off mine, but we are fortunate. Some galleries take 40 and 50%. "What if I don't sell?" "She is gambling. Gamblers sometimes lose." She did not lose, but she did not win either. The opening was a moderate success. Some of her collectors came, some of my classmates came. Some critics came. Yudo Krinsky came, Rav Mendel Dorochov came, looked, and walked out. My uncle and aunt were there. People sauntered in off the streets. It was a warm day in early May, and the streets were crowded. There were drinks and food, non-kosher food. She was in the art business, not in the religious catering business, Anna Schaefer had said. This was not a bat mitzvah, but an art show. I did not eat. The sharpest memory I have of that show, a memory that was reinforced by the 2 other shows she gave me before I left for Europe, and the returns to haunt me more and more frequently these days, is the memory of standing in that gallery and seeing the faces of my world on its walls, paintings of my people and my street, paintings of my mother and me walking together, paintings of Yudel Krinsky and Mrs. Rakover, paintings of old ladies on the parkway benches, all the years of my life summed up on the walls of galleries, and then seeing some of the empty spaces when the show was over. Yudel Krinsky was gone. Mrs. Rakover was gone. My mother and I were gone. Some of the old ladies on the park benches were gone. We are not rich, Anna Schaefer said to me when it was done and the walls were bare. But we are not poor either. The critics were kind. The critics who had noticed me had commented on my extreme youth and had been very kind, with the exception of one who dismissed me as a fraud and described me as glutted with banality, sentimentality, and a menacing affinity for Picassoid forms. Jacob Kahn liked that phrase. He went around quoting it for weeks. Anna, did you know our prodigy has a menacing affinity for Picassoid forms? Anna Schaefer was not amused. I wrote my mother about the show. She wrote back expressing joy. They would not return that summer, she added. My father's work was not yet done. She asked me to call the tenants in the apartment and inform them that they would not have to move out. I spent the summer in Provincetown with Jacob and Tanya Kahn. Jacob Kahn was in Paris, visiting a retrospective given for an old friend from his Berlin days when President Kennedy was assassinated. He returned to America a few days after the funeral, locked himself in his studio and painted. I saw the canvas when it was done. It radiated his anguish. He said to me once during those days of pain, "There will be a new dark age. I remember Germany. But where can I run to now? I think I will not enjoy reaching 80. Later, Tanya Kahn called and said he was not well. Yes, he was indulging himself again. No, she had no idea how long it would last. It took almost a week. When I saw him again, he would not talk about it. My second show took place the following spring. The critics were very kind, except for one friend, our friend of the Picassoid forms, who had other things to say this time. We are not rich yet, Anna Schaefer said, but I am beginning to feel optimistic. You are a greedy old woman, Jacob Kahn said. A greedy, rich old woman, Anna Schaefer said. In July, I went with Jacob and Tanya Kahn to Provincetown. My parents returned from Europe in the middle of August. My father's work was done. He had been reassigned to an office next to Rav Mendel Dorochov on the second floor of the Ladover building. My parents moved back into our old apartment when I returned from Provincetown. I moved into my old room. I could not paint in that room because it was too small. There was a brief family meeting with my aunt and uncle and my parents. My father's suggestion resolved the difficulty. I lived with my parents and painted in my uncle's house.